welcome back to the Rock Your Best Life podcast. With me today, I have Laura, Spath. I think I'm saying that right.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Okay, Spath, and she has an incredible story of healing with the carnivore diet, meat-based diet. And she is an amazing person to watch on Instagram and YouTube. I just love all her cooking tutorials. And life tutorials and all that stuff. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So is it Spath or Spath?
It's Spath. Yeah. So I didn't even realize all my handles are like Laura E, which have my middle initial Spath. I had created them all long before I was doing just like as my personal accounts, just with my full name, but it kind of looks like Laura's Path. And so when you, so most people who find me think that it said Laura's Path.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Hey,
that can both work. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So we'll just start with, just tell us a little bit about yourself and, what was your life before, changing your diet and, what was your health story?
Sure. So I, really briefly, going all the way back to as a kid, I grew up in a really rural part of Indiana. We didn't have processed foods. I never had soda. My mom was like made homemade bread. We grew our own vegetables, like very clean, whole foods based diet. And it wasn't until I was 15, my parents got divorced and we started eating a lot more packaged food at the time, the like box pasta mix and the hamburger helpers and things like that. So I started gaining weight kind of right around 15, 16. And then I went to college at 18 and had access to fast food and, processed food and restaurants. And I could go to Taco Bell at 2 a.m. every night. I lived across the street from a Taco Bell for a while. And I started drinking sodas and donuts. And I used to stop every morning and get a white powdered Hostess donuts and a giant Diet Coke for breakfast every morning. And then usually sometimes the day ended with like 2 a.m. going to Taco Bell. And so I very quickly gained a tremendous amount of weight in college. And then that kind of started my cycle of like kind of on the rails or off the rails, I guess, or on the wagon and off the wagon. And I pretty much spent the next 10 years or more, probably closer to 15 years, like either on a diet or completely off the rails. And when I'm saying off the rails, it's like, the height of my poor eating was stopping for Chick-fil-A for breakfast and then stopping at a gas station to grab my snacks for the day for work. And I would start snacking around 9 o'clock, once the Chick-fil-A breakfast wore off a couple hours later, I would snack until lunch. I would go out for lunch, usually fast food or some kind of restaurant for lunch. In the afternoon, I would need like a treat or something to get me through that 2 o'clock crash. I would go home and eat dinner, usually something like pasta or veggies and meat and potatoes and bread and spaghetti and all that kind of stuff, like tons of processed foods and carbs. And then obviously like at night, I needed to have more food. And so I needed dessert and usually finished my day with like a pint of ice cream. And so that was a pretty, like over the years, I did that routine a lot, like pretty much nonstop eating all the time. And that was like a normal day. And then I also would go on a diet, which is where then I would try to replace all of those things with obviously what I thought was healthy foods. And, what I thought was healthy foods over the years changed, tried low calorie, just eating salads and grilled vegetables and rice. And I tried a vegan diet for a while, living on quinoa and roasted vegetables and spinach smoothies. And I tried different variations of low carb along the way. So I would always lose 20, 30 pounds and then celebrate with a cheat day. Like, yay, I lost 20 pounds. Now let's take a break and have a cheat day, something completely terrible. And then I would never be able to get back on track again and gain all that weight back and usually plus more. So I kind of, over the years, then I got married, I had 2 kids. And so obviously like gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of weight with both kids. And kind of ended up at 263 pounds was my heaviest weight ever. Yeah. So that was all before. either like usually I was always on a diet, but then I also
Mhm.
was like off the rails quite a bit at the time.
And when you were at your heaviest, were there any kind of health issues you were having at all? I mean, did you feel fine, just bigger, or did it kind of interrupt anything in your life?
So I started having a lot of health issues, which is kind of what had me hit rock bottom a little bit.
Mhm.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was pre-diabetic. And my
Mhm.
chart, my medical chart, looking back on it now, my A1C, and I was labeled pre-diabetic, but my doctor never told me that, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I never was actually told that I was, but when I look back now, I see that I was.
Yeah.
I had my meniscus, had knee surgery from a torn meniscus, mainly because I just was so heavy and my knee was giving out from having to carry that weight around all the time. You know, that's an
Mhm.
injury that usually football players get, but I just was so
Yeah.
heavy that I needed that repair. So that knee pain, knee surgery, and recovery was really difficult. And at the same time, I started having issues with my gallbladder. I
Mm.
had like an ultrasound done. I had some gallstones. I started having issues with digestive issues and hemorrhoids and all kinds of really terrible things. I started seeing a colorectal specialist to talk about having some like major intestinal surgery repair.
Oh, wow.
I definitely needed it at the time. That was a huge thing for me, but they explained the recovery to me and like how long I would have to be out of work to recover from those types of surgeries. And I just literally couldn't afford to not go to work that long.
Mhm.
And so I just didn't know how it was going to be possible. So like all of those things kind of were accumulating at the same time. Was my knee, my gallbladder, my stomach, my digestive issues. Like I had just had one surgery. It was possible I was going to need my gallbladder taken out soon. I was going to need some sort of like intestinal hemorrhoid repair surgery. And then, you know, just talking to my OB about my hormone levels and my thyroid, and like everything started just completely falling apart all at the same time. And I was my heaviest. I was exhausted all the time.
Mhm.
And really just everything kind of just steamrolled all at once. It felt like.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And that, unfortunately, that sounds kind of like a lot of those issues are kind of like common now. Because I know that's
Yeah.
what led me to my health journey. It was really all digestive issues, you know. um, and some of those things that you mentioned, I was suffering from too. But how did like some of that stuff, did it affect you mentally, or did it affect like any of your relationships, like with friends or your
You
husband or
know,
anything like
yeah.
that?
You know what? My husband and I were always kind of on and off track together. And so this is kind of the terrible thing, is that my relationships were really good around food because eating with people is fun, and being a hot mess with your friends is kind of fun. I'm not going to lie. So like I had
Yeah.
coworkers who I would go to lunch with every day. And then we would all go out for ice cream at 2 PM. And I had friends who, like, when I'm a hot mess, then they got to be better and try to help me,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, you know? So
No,
like,
it does.
I do have a friend who, once I finally got my crap together,
Mm-hmm.
our friendship kind of fell apart and I couldn't figure out why.
Mm-hmm.
And over time I realized it's because, like, wait a second, I wasn't this hot mess who was reaching out to her for help anymore, because I wasn't on this terrible emotional food roller coaster. And she didn't really like that anymore, because she like didn't like the fact that I was kind of like getting myself together a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I totally hear you. I know. I had the same thing with some friends too, and even just coworkers and people around me when I started just um, trying to get healthier and do what made me feel good. It seemed like everyone kind of wants to either sabotage you,
Yes.
or they just, it's like they don't. I don't know that they don't want well for you, but
Yeah.
um,
It is so socially acceptable to eat terribly, right? And it's very socially acceptable to binge eat, to binge drink in a lot of ways, to eat to celebrate, to say YOLO, to say, people don't say YOLO anymore, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To say self-care is I'm going to have ice cream and a glass of wine. Like all of those things are very socially acceptable. And I could eat literally all day long, processed foods and junk, and go out for ice cream every single day. And nobody said anything. But then all of a sudden I switched my diet, and then people get concerned that I have an eating disorder because I'm doing intermittent fasting, or I just don't eat for a day. I'm like, you watched me eat 10,000 calories a day for how many years? And nobody said anything. But now, because I just happen to skip a day of eating, everybody's all of a sudden concerned. Like, I think I say this often, but it has so much more to do with them and their own insecurities about your change and your improvement of yourself than it does with the change at all.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of experienced the same thing too, because I also am a recovering alcoholic too. Yeah. And I've quit that a few times, and I would always go to food to kind of replace that, I guess. But then I always had issues with, I had really bad reactions to certain foods, a lot of food sensitivities. And so it was like, oh my gosh, you can't win.
Right. So I'm sure a lot of your relationships changed, and just like, obviously all of your habits and relationships change with eliminating all the alcohol and all the food completely.
Yeah. And what was really sad is that I would get bullied at work and like be made fun of because I didn't know what to eat for a while. I would say I was more like a whole foods kind of keto approach for like a number of years. And I would either eat salads, or I would either crave vegetables, or it would be meat. And so people would see me eating a big salad, and then the next day they would see me eating meat, but they wouldn't say anything about the meat. They would just say, oh, look at the rabbit, she's eating her salad again. But it's a hard road when, it's like people don't really understand what you're going through.
Right. When you're the only person not eating a donut, they think that it's that you have so much self-control, and somehow it's a judgment on them and their lack of self-control, when it really has nothing to do with anybody. Like, obviously that's everybody's own view of that they're the center of everything. We all do that. But just because I'm not eating a donut, first of all, it doesn't mean that I have self-control. If anything, it means I have no self-control, and I can't not eat 5 donuts. Yeah. And then it also doesn't have anything to say about what you should or shouldn't be doing. Like, it's just simply that this is the choice I'm making for myself.
Well, yeah. And that's what, I always had the issue at parties and at work. Like, I would be the only one not eating these certain food, like I wouldn't eat the cake. I wouldn't eat the ice cream because, like you said, like, I can't control myself. I could have a bite of cake and I'd want to eat the whole thing.
Right.
And I would feel like crap if I even ate one bite. So
it's torture then at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I did struggle with a little bit of, binge eating too, like an addictive habits after, just trying to really improve my health for so long. But let's talk a little bit about that too. What do you think kind of led to your, binging, a little bit of binge eating, addictive kind of behaviors with food?
I wish I knew to say like this was the trigger or this was the trauma, but I think it really is just number one. I think that more than anything, the food is addictive. There are things in those processed foods that are highly addictive, and that is how I think a lot of it started. And I think that I was introduced to those foods around the same time that I was going through puberty, and so then. And kind of for emotional reasons, like experiencing, divorce, and I had a brother that died, and so kind of like using processed foods to deal with stress and grief starts a habit and a ritual and some kind of coping mechanisms. And then more than anything, those foods are really addictive, and so you might use it for stress one day. But I don't have to be stressed to eat or to binge or to do something bad. Like, I can just be happy, or I can be bored, all of those different things. And so while I do think those were, the kind of just hard things you go through in your life are a contributing factor. I also think one of the biggest contributing factors is just the addictive nature of the foods in general.
Oh yes, I agree. Yeah, and they spend billions of dollars, don't they?
Yeah.
On developing the right formula, like what is it? Salt, fat,
Sugar. Yeah.
sugar. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, they know what they're doing, and they're getting everybody addicted. And then one of the things I noticed, when it's like you have this aha moment, when you realize all of these things around us are kind of subconsciously, almost like brainwashing us to eat those foods. Because like I hadn't watched TV for a while, and and then I was like, every commercial is targeted, towards like all this fast food and all these sweet treats, and even like, I have a 13-year-old son, and I'm the bad mom. I don't let him go to fast food places, and I haven't since he was born, and because I didn't want him in that, addictive, habit of doing that. So it's kind of all around us.
Yeah, I watch TV, but I don't watch commercials usually. And literally yesterday, the kids and I just happened to be watching something that had commercials and live TV, which I don't think my kids have really ever seen commercials because they're so spoiled with Netflix and stuff. But every commercial was like the channel came on, and my 5 and 7-year-old were like, pizza, I want pizza. Sonic, I want Sonic. Well, Popeyes, what's Popeyes? That looks good. And then in between all of those food commercials or candy commercials, in between all of those was prescription medication commercials.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the only thing we saw was, Sweet Tarts and Popeyes and prescription medication.
I know. Oh my gosh, it's so bad. I know. And actually, I used to work at a pharmacy, and that's why I left, because I just couldn't advocate.
Right.
At the time, I was being woke. I couldn't advocate for things that I just didn't believe in, there's a place, of course, for some, but I saw a lot of people that I helped, that I would be waiting on. They just look so sickly and just dependent on all these medications. It's so sad.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's kind of move forward a little bit. And what kind of led you to, I know you did a little bit of a keto approach for a little bit, and then eventually carnivore. So just like walk us through that, like what happened first, I guess.
So I had never heard of carnivore. And so I knew, I had watched the Magic Pill movie, which is like the keto movie that came out a few years ago. And I watched that and was like, I'm very easily convinced to do anything. I'm not going to lie. Like I watched the vegan documentary Forks Over Knives, like many years ago, and decided I was going to be vegan. So like you make a movie about it, like I'm pretty gullible. And so I watched the Magic Pill movie, and I was like, okay, now this is it. Like, this is what I got to do. I got to be keto and do low carb. And so my husband and I started doing a low carb diet, and he had diabetes. And so that was really helpful for us. Like we knew he had to cut out sugar and carbs, and I felt better. We both started losing weight. And so I just thought it was a weight loss diet, another weight loss plan. And kind of over time, I had originally started with eating some more keto processed foods, but over time, I was cutting out a lot of those processed foods and sticking with more whole foods keto, but I still was having some vegetables and some nuts. And around that same time, we heard about Dr. Jason Fung.
Oh, yeah.
And learned a lot about fasting. And so that was really, to regulate blood sugar, we knew we needed to do some fasting. And so that was a light bulb moment for me of, I don't have to eat all day long, 3 meals a day plus snacks, to keep my metabolism up, right? Like learning that was this huge moment. And I think in some ways results are addicting and knowledge is addicting. And so when you start having results on something, then you start digging into learning more and more about it. And then that becomes addicting. And so it fills up your time. It gives you purpose. It gives you energy and drive. And so I really went down this rabbit hole of learning about fasting and low carb, and, over time was cutting out more and more of the processed foods. And then going down this rabbit hole of looking for knowledge is what led us to carnivore, and hearing about the carnivore diet.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to that. Well, because I think we just like we want to know answers. Like if we're not feeling well, and things are not working, we have to find answers. And I think that's where a lot of people probably found a lot of, the carnivore diet or a meat-based diet.
I do think though that most people want one person to tell them everything that they need to know. And I think, I think unfortunately it doesn't work that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to find and listen to 20 people on the list of names that I could say contributed to me getting my health together and putting my weight in line and getting my aha moments and giving me all of these things. Like there's a lot of people on that list. There's not one person that I mirror exactly in how they do anything. And I had to like kind of piece together, and it's more about like learning all the tools and then, making it all work for you. And so I do think that's one of the good and bad things, is that sometimes that can be confusing for people to hear my story and then hear somebody else's story who's very differently. When I'm telling you fasting and all these things work and somebody else is telling you that they don't, who are you supposed to believe? And I think you have to, don't listen to me. You have to go backwards and find who are the people that are giving you all the scientific information about it, and learn all of those things and then implement it in a way that's going to be right for you. It just takes a lot more work than what most people are willing to do. Most people are wanting a quick fix, and for somebody just to give them a checklist that they can check off and fix themselves. And unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way.
No, I really think you have to be your own scientist and advocate, and you have to experiment, like, maybe, and that's why it gets really confusing in like the keto carnivore space sometimes. Just the whole diet space is like, okay, this worked for Sally, but I'm gaining weight.
Right.
Or my hair's falling out. I don't feel good. I'm having digestive issues. And that's kind of what led me to, now I did a carnivore diet for like a year, and then I started slowly adding a few vegetables in here and there. And so some days I'm carnivore, full carnivore, and then some days I'm kind of more ketovore,
Yeah.
But I'm okay with that because I feel really good, and I've healed a lot of digestive issues. But I think that sometimes it does get a little bit, like dogmatic, because sometimes, this way of life works so well for some people. And they just think this is how everybody has to do it. Like everyone has to just eat meat, drink water, salt.
Right. Or no salt. One of the two.
No salt.
Yeah. But I think you said it great, of like, you have to be your own scientist and do experiments, but you also have to be your own research scientist. Like you have to do your own research, and doing your own research isn't listening to people like me telling you what works for me. Doing your own research is like reading that stack of books that's behind you, listening to people like Dr. Jason Fung, Ben Bickman, Ted Naiman, Judy Cho, like listening to Dr. Barry, like all of these people who write all of this excellent knowledge and information, and have all the research out there of you have to be able to take a look at that yourself and interpret it, and not expecting somebody else to do that interpretation for you.
Yeah, exactly. And then, for some people, they need to work with a coach. Is that something you would ever consider doing?
I haven't,
because you've had success, like coaching other people, or
I haven't thought about it, and I don't do it at all for several reasons. One, more than anything, I just feel like I don't really have myself quite figured out yet, and I don't think that I'm qualified enough to be giving other people advice when I am still looking for some years of long-term consistency behind me. I don't have that yet, to be honest. I still don't know what the right thing to do is. And so I definitely think that's not something I'm in a place that I'm ready for or qualified to do. I don't have any experience or knowledge or research other than like my own personal life. And so I don't think that's something I can share. But also, more than anything, I work a full-time corporate job. I work 60 hours a week in a corporate world. I'm a mom. I have a family. And so it's also not something I try to do stuff on social media regularly. It's also just not something that I have time for. And so rather than doing individual coaching sessions, if I have the time, I'd rather spend time with my family or devote that time to maybe make a YouTube video and where I could hopefully help more people and use my time kind of that way. But those are kind of I guess the two reasons. Like, I don't think I'm qualified, but I also just maybe don't have the time to put into that really.
Oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's see what other questions I had for you today. So how do you approach your diet right now?
So right now is probably different than how I've done it for most of the time. So I've been carnivore for 3 years. And for the first 2.5 years, I just did like one meal a day. So I did a 24-hour fast every day, one really big meal a day, mostly meat, like all meat and maybe some cheese in that meal, but it really strict one meal a day. And then a lot of fasting, 48-hour fasts here and there. Mm-hmm. Right now, I go back and forth between 1 and 2 meals. I try to say like I'm eating 2 meals, but sometimes I just end up eating so much for lunch that I'm not hungry for dinner. So I incorporate a lot more variety of meats. When I spent the first couple of years doing mainly beef, like 90% beef and maybe another shrimp every once in a while or a little bit of stuff. I think right now, partly because of the beef prices, but also partly because of just trying to keep some variety in my diet. I eat a lot of different kinds of meat right now. So chicken and pork and shrimp, beef, obviously. Bacon is obviously pork, but I eat a lot of eggs. I eat more eggs now than I really did in the last several years. Mm-hmm. So I would say I try to do 2 meals a day, but about half the time I end up doing 1 meal. And then about the other half of the time I end up doing 2 right now. I still like to incorporate fasting. I think that it's really important and healthy for you to do a 48-hour fast occasionally. How often is based on your goals or your needs, how much you want to lose weight. The more weight you want to lose, I think the more often you could do it. But I think even if you're not trying to lose weight at all, it still is good to incorporate a fast of longer than 24 hours occasionally to give your body a break for some good digestion, to keep those ketones up. But I think that for the most part, I don't worry about being super strict on that. I am careful about how often I eat because I know that's my biggest trigger is just kind of grazing and snacking. And I make sure to not do that very often.
Yeah. What's the longest fast you've ever done?
So I have done 7 days. Yeah. I've done that a couple times, but I personally didn't find any more benefits out of 7 days than I did out of like maybe 72 hours or it's not that it's just, there's, it took longer to kind of get used to eating again. But as far as like long-term benefits, I personally would rather do like every other day. So a 48-hour fast, skip a day at 40, eat like, I would rather do a bunch of 48-hour fasts close together than do 7 days again. Like those are things I think people should only do once or twice a year at most if they're going to do something that long. But I like doing, a 72-hour fast occasionally, but not very often.
And I did a 7-day one like a couple years ago. Yeah. And then I'm gonna try and do one like once a year, but I know last year when I did it, it seemed a bit harder for me for some reason.
Well, I think that
I don't know why.
The thinner that you get, the harder that is because your body doesn't have as many fat stores to be pulling from. And so I think, if the thinner you are, the longer you may not want to, but I think doing frequent shorter fasts is almost as beneficial. It depends on what you're trying to heal, but it's almost as beneficial as doing this massively long fast.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I just started doing some, just throwing in like a 24-hour one here and there. And then I'm going to work back up because for a while I was kind of listening to other people and I was kind of second guessing myself. I had been fasting here and there, and I've been listening to other people saying that it was like bad for me, and maybe I shouldn't fast, and maybe I should eat more. So I was doing that, and I actually was just kind of feeling worse,
Right.
And so that's why I feel really good fasting, fasted. I feel like I can accomplish more. I even work out. I work out fasted, and
I do think the downside to fasting is that sometimes people get a little competitive with it or one up each other, like 48, 72, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. Like, I think that's where it can get unhealthy, which is why I think, I don't try to encourage people to do a 7-day fast. Like, you need to be very specific reasons, and it needs to be very specific timing for you in your life. Like, I wouldn't say to a group personally now, like, hey, let's all do this because I don't know what or they have to make that decision for themselves. Right. I think there's pretty much everybody, in my opinion, again, I'm not an expert, in my opinion, pretty much everybody could benefit from an occasional 48-hour fast and feel great doing it.
I agree. Yeah. And what would you say to somebody who is maybe looking at your story and even, my story or our way of eating and saying that it's harmful to the environment and it's even harmful to humans? Like, we should not be eating all this meat. We're going to die. We're going to have a coronary. What would you say to somebody?
I don't even entertain those conversations, to be honest. Like, if somebody at work completely out of this space said something to me like that, I would just say, like, wow, I hope not. Like, I hope I'm not wrong. Like, I'm really not. I'm not going to be the person to send them articles and to try to convince them or change their mind in any way. It's just not what I'm going to do. I know that my mind is not going to be changed by the comments and the articles they're sending me, and they're saying, you can find stuff to kind of validate anything that you believe out there. And so I'm certainly not going to. So I'm just not going to entertain those conversations, especially from an online space. Like, when the vegans come find your channels and stuff and like go a little crazy on all your stuff, like, I just ignore it or block them or something. In real life, if somebody thinks fasting is a eating disorder, or, my mom thought that for a little while, and I sent her some research and stuff, and obviously she came around and learned. So there's people like my mom that I would care to have those conversations with and want to incorporate. If I have a random coworker who just tells me that I'm going to have a heart attack someday, like, I don't really know why I would be talking about that with them. I try to avoid a lot of those conversations. Like, it's not my job to go around and convert people. I think people are going to come around when they're ready to, and they'll come ask me questions when they're ready, which does happen quite a bit. But as far as like my own personal perspective, I know, like, from an environmental standpoint, most cows end up being, give back more to the earth and the nutrients. And there's, I think the fact of like cows causing the global warming has been debunked, that it's actually a very small percentage of those things. And it also gives back to the soil and to the ground. We're not raising cattle in places where you should be growing crops and grains. We're not taking away farmland for raising cows. Those cows are being raised in places where you can't really grow a lot of crops anyway. And I think that the message of monocropping and raising all these crazy organic vegetables everywhere all throughout the world and flying them all over the place, like, I think that's getting to be a point where it's debunked, where raising mass amounts of crops and things for these, Beyond Burgers and stuff, anybody in our space, in this diet, keto carnivore space, understands and knows that that's way worse for the environment than the one cow my family might eat over the course of a year, or whatever that might be. And I guess as far as it being harmful for myself, I think that I think I usually can debunk that just by, first of all, I'm not going to like, well, you don't have to eat this way, is usually my response. If somebody's like, well, I hope you don't have a heart attack, like, don't worry. My bacon is not causing your cholesterol to go up. Like, you're fine. You don't worry about it. But more than anything, I think I don't typically get a lot of those comments just because people have seen my results, where I used to be obviously very obese and very sick and had a lot of issues. And now I'm much healthier. And I think that definitely makes a big difference. And that's why usually people start asking questions, is because they're like, wait a second, why aren't you having a heart attack? Like, why aren't you unhealthy? Let me ask you more questions about it.
I agree. And then, like you said before, like doing the maybe telling them, well, go do your research or read a book.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I actually, there was a time when of course I didn't know. And so I did the research too. And a lot more of it is coming out, as far as, some of the research that was done, 50 plus years ago was not accurate.
Right.
And we've based our whole like diet on that, and a lot of these myths, from that.
Yeah. I think Dr. Berry says like the demonization of cholesterol is one of the biggest downfalls, right? Or somehow he worded it like it's just one of the biggest problems that we have in our society is the demonization of cholesterol. And I think that the more people learn about your total cholesterol number not mattering and the ratios and your low triglycerides and those things are what matters as far as a true health indicator. I think the doctors still have a long way to go to understand that information so that the masses can start understanding it. But I think, like you said, the pharmaceutical companies have a little too much say in what the doctors state and what the doctor's standards are. And so I do think we have a long way to go from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any tests done like recently, or?
You know what? It's been almost 2 years. The last time I had a big batch of blood work done was in 2019, in the fall, like October of 2019. And obviously then everything then was like a perfect carnivore. My triglycerides were like 60, my HDL was high. My everything else, my CRP numbers, everything else was perfect. And so since then, I just haven't got around to it. I actually emailed my doctor recently and said like, hey, I haven't been back in a while. Can I get this list of blood work done? And I like listed off all these things more so that I wanted to test just to kind of show people like your folate and your cholesterol and your CR. And I listed all these different things. And she emailed me back and was like, I don't really test those things. And she kind of just doesn't really want to run a bunch of those tests. They're not things that people normally run tests on. So I don't think she's going to do that. So I got to find another avenue. I am interested though in getting a bunch of blood work done. I just don't know where to go yet to get that. I got to find somebody to order the specific test that I want.
Yeah.
So that I can give people like an accurate picture.
Yeah, I know it's hard. I know I'm lucky enough to where my doctor knows exactly my diet and everything. She's pretty open. But she did want to do like a panel like last year. And yeah, my cholesterol is high, but my triglycerides are like extremely low. Like, not in a bad way. They're like 30. They're 35, and I thought
that's amazing. Yeah,
I know. And so she, of course, they recommend, oh, your cholesterol is high, and on the report they recommend eating, less, red meat, more vegetable oils. And not, I'm not worried about it, and I'm not going to do any of those things. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think once you tell them, no, I don't want your statins, thank you very much. And then you disappear for a while, like then you come back and you're like, okay, I want more blood work done. She's not really that excited because I didn't take the medicine that they wanted me to take.
Yeah, I know. And it's, it's sad because they always just recommend statins. They never ask you about your diet. Or anything else. Right. It's always just the drug,
Yeah.
And sometimes that causes more harm than good for people.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't, what else would you like to tell us? I guess. Is there, I'll let you go in a little bit here. What is the overall message that you would like to get, about your story, about your health journey? What would you like to tell people?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's just obviously finding what works for you. I think what everybody can agree on in all of these spaces is that nobody needs to be eating like processed foods and tons of carbohydrates and lots of sugars and seed oils and those things. That's easy. I think that there are two different types of people. There's the people who need to jump straight into the deep end and go strict carnivore of beef, salt, and water and like detox from everything else. And then, treat it like an elimination diet. And then maybe you can add things back in over time. But then there's also people who need to go more gradual. And if you want to start with keto and then kind of slowly cut things out over time and get more strict and see how you feel when your weight loss stalls, then you add fasting. Kind of both of those options work great. There's not one right answer on what you need to do. But I think it's important that you kind of are honest with yourself about what you can handle. Like, are you saying that you're keto just so you can eat a bunch of keto treats? And then you're kind of blaming keto when you're not losing weight? Well, maybe we're eating too many treats over here. Or, I think for some people having to go strict meat, salt, water would make them feel very overwhelmed and give up and then go back to their old diet and go off the rails. So I think I would have done that if I had gone from eating pizza and ice cream every day to strict beef, salt, and water and fasting. I would have said like, forget this, like I need to go, I'm never going to make it. And I never would have lasted this long. So I do feel best when I keep it pretty strict on just like meat and salt and water and cheese, a little bit, cheese, but like just keeping it very strict carnivore is where I feel best. But I had to figure that out over time. And so just don't put too many rules on yourself in the beginning and kind of just take things, one day at a time. If you mess up and eat something, you don't have to wait until the following Monday to get back on track again. You can simply start over the next day or whatever day that happens to be. And it's not a fail. It's just, a little sidestep.
Yeah, I agree. And if people are looking for, I guess a community support, what would you recommend?
I have met some amazing people in my local area through social media, and that's a really hard, weird thing to figure out. I think you, more than anything, should plan a meetup in your area. Pick the town that you live in, plan a meetup, tag some of us that have larger accounts. I will share your graphic in my stories, and hopefully other people that live in your part of, wherever people live, and meet local people. I think there's a great community online. That you can meet people through online. However, I also think that sometimes that can feel very disconnected. And there's something really powerful about being able to just go to lunch and talk in person with somebody who eats the same way that you do. And most of us don't have that in real life.
Yeah.
And anybody that I do have, I've met through Instagram and through this. So plan something. You don't have to have this massive following to plan something in your area. Let some of us tag us in stories and we will try to share and help you get the word out. Other people can come and you'll be able to like build an actual community where you live. And then beyond that, absorbing things online. If you need a coach, find one who's going to help encourage you and support you. But I think more than anything, there's a lot of information out there and free information out there that you can find, listen to a lot of podcasts. That's really where it took me down this rabbit hole. I think that's a place where you can learn and find what works for you that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, and that's kind of what I did. I just listened to podcasts and honestly, I got kind of lost, trying to find answers on I guess Facebook mostly, the groups. Yeah. I had to remove myself from some because it was just too much.
Yeah, I agree. And more than anything, I think Instagram is obviously where I spend a lot of time, but that should be that should be an entertainment source for you, not an education source for the most part. I think there are great people on there who are doing great things, but I think there's also just a lot of us who are trying to be there for entertainment purposes. And so be aware of what that is, right? And I think I'm not discrediting anybody, but I am saying that just be aware of the credibility of the person that you're taking your advice from, and realize that people like me are there for entertainment purposes and hopefully encouragement and just to show you some examples of how you can eat this way, and maybe give you some ideas, but I am not there to, educate you on what you should be doing for your health. So
Yeah.
I think too many people use that as their research. Like
Yes.
it's something like an Instagram is their research, when in reality, it should be there for entertainment and encouragement and motivation. But find your research in other sources.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And
you
not a Facebook, not a Facebook group either.
Oh God, no.
There is some good information out there.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's too hard in the beginning to sift through all the bad information to find all the good information. Again, use it for entertainment, not for education.
Yes, I agree. And you have a podcast too.
I do. Yeah.
I love it so far. It's awesome.
Thank you.
With Judy Cho, who I love too, and I loved her book. And it's called Cutting Against the Grain.
Yes.
And so I will put a link for that in the show notes here, and then I'll put a link of all your social media accounts as well. Thank you so much for coming on, Laura. And I will talk to you next time.